Om Vishwandarpana Drishyamana Nagari Tulyannijantargatam Pashyannatmani Mayaya Bahirvodbhutam Yatha Nidraya Yasakshat Kurute Prabodha Samaye Swatmanamevadvayam Tasmai Shri Guru Murtaye Nama Idam Shri Dakshinamurtaye Om Narayanam Padma Bhuvam Vasishtham Shaktin cha Tatputra Parasharam cha Vyasam Shukam Gauda Padam Mahantam Govinda Yogindra Mathasya Shishyam Shri Shankaracharya Mathasya Padma Padancha Hastamalakam Shishyam Tantotakam Vattikakaramanyaan Asmatgurun Santatamānatosmi Shrutismritipuranānām Ālayam Karunalayam Namāmi Bhagavatpādam Shankaram Lokashankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutrabhāshyakritav Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punaha Parabrahmanishtham Swato Dharmanishtham Ahimsaikanischam Swashishyai Sujushtam Yatinam Varishtham Gurunam Garishtham Dayananda Rupam Madacharya Mide Namah Shri Paramarthaya Samsaradhyasanashine Shrotriya Brahmanishthaya Tasmai Brahmavide Namaha Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. I welcome everyone to the 7th class of this Fundamentals of Vedanta series. We were looking at the question of why study Vedanta. And we said the reason is that the benefit of Vedanta study is this Purnatvam, the unconditional fulfillment that we all are seeking. How does this Purnatvam arise through the study of Vedanta? The study gives rise to Atma Jnanam, and the Atma Jnanam reveals that my nature is Purnatvam, being one with Paramatma. Then a question arises that anybody can study Vedanta, but will the study lead to this Purnatvam? And that is where the question of Adhikaritvam becomes important. An Adhikari is someone who meets the criteria for being a candidate for the study of Vedanta and for the rise of the Atma Jnana. So there are three things that we said that an Adhikari should check off. One is that the Adhikari should be a mumukshuhu, a direct seeker of this Purnatvam. Because like we said, every human being is seeking this Purnatvam, but through various things in the world. So an Adhikari should be mature enough to come to the conclusion that I need to somehow seek this Purnatvam directly. So Adhikari should be a mumukshuhu. Then the second point is the Adhikari should be a jignasuhu, meaning the Adhikari should be somebody who sees the indispensable connection between the study of Vedanta and the rise of this Purnatvam. Then the third point we said is that the Adhikari should have certain qualifications, a certain preparation of mind known as Chitta Shuddhi. So we are now looking at how an Adhikari becomes an Adhikari. And to answer that question, we have to first see how this adhikari becomes a mumukshuhu first. Second point is how this adhikari becomes a jigyasuhu. And the third point is how this adhikari gains these other things, the chitta shuddhi. We are sequentially looking at each of these. How does the adhikari become a mumukshuhu? For this question, we said that the adhikari has to, like anybody else, go through and try to gain this fulfillment from various experiences in the world and learn from it. See what those experiences can give me and see what they cannot give me. That's the only way one comes to this mumukshutva. There, with regards to the first question, we were exploring what these experiences are that the adhikari, before becoming an adhikari, before becoming a mumukshu, what are the experiences this person pursued? And there we saw that the experiences can be classified broadly as four purusharthas. Purushanam arthaha, purushartha. And there, the first two purusharthas are arthaha and kamaha. The seeking for security and the seeking for pleasures that we said are common with animals also. But that, we said, cannot lead me to this Purnatvam, and therefore the Shastram comes in and informs me about these two other Purusharthas called Dharma and Moksha. And in that context, we were looking at the meaning of Dharma Purushartha. We said we look at three meanings of Dharma. The first one is Chodana Lakshanaha Arthaha Dharmaha. This is taken from the Jaimini Sutras. The lifestyle prescribed by the Vedic injunctions in terms of vidhi and nishedha, in terms of do's and don'ts. These constitute as dharma. These comprise of duties, values, and attitudes. The duties being yajna, danam, and tapaha. Yajna being panchamahayajna, and tapaha comprising of disciplines and austerities. And then the values and attitudes also we saw, things like satyam, vada, etc. And the attitudes like matradevo bhava, pitradevo bhava, etc. So these comprise the first meaning of dharma. And then we transition to the second meaning. And there we said that the human being is the only creature that we see who has this free will. All other creatures in this world, they operate without deliberation, without choice. They just do their thing based on the time of the day or time of the year, whatever seasons, they just do their thing. And when they do their thing, whatever it is, then there is harmony in the creation. We said that the human being is the only creature with the free will, and therefore the human being can either use the free will properly or can abuse the free will. And in the context of the overall harmony, the action can be viewed as being right or wrong. If the action contributes to the harmony, then it becomes right action. And that is what duty really is. What is the duty in any given situation? Is what is it that leads to the harmony, that leads to the order, that leads to the well-being? That is what we would say is the right action in any given situation. The only human beings' actions can be classified as right or wrong. And that is why it becomes important for a human being to adhere to duty. Therefore, we say that when a human being adheres to duty, meaning follows the first meaning of dharma that we discussed, then it leads to the second meaning of dharma, dharanat dharma. Dharanat dharma ityahuhu dharmo dharayati prajaha yasya dharana sanyuktaha sa dharma iti nischayah. That which is associated with sustenance, order, well-being, those actions constitute as dharma. Then we ask the question, harmony at what levels? And we said it's harmony at the level of the individual, at the level of the family, at the level of the society, and at the level of the whole environment. So we looked at it, we are going to look at each of these: individual, family level, societal level, and environmental level. But we looked at the individual level first and saw how not adhering to dharma brings about disharmony within the individual. And we took the example of not speaking the truth. And we saw that not speaking the truth can lead to all these issues like conflicts, guilt, worry, fear. And more importantly, we said it leads to a split within the person where the doer and the knower become split. The doer and the knower become split. One becomes a disintegrated individual, a fractured individual. And then one will find that when the individual is not united, the individual is not integrated, then even accomplishing one's legitimate goals, even be it in the sphere of artha and kama, that also becomes difficult for such an individual. In fact, we said that even the artha and kama that the person has already acquired, one may not be able to enjoy it properly. The artha may not give the security it's supposed to give, and the kama may not give the pleasure it's supposed to give. We said one increases the distance between oneself and this jnanam, between oneself and the jnani. Because the path to the jnanam, the path to the absolute truth is through relative truth. Therefore, the following of these values becomes very important for the sake of individual harmony. And then we looked at the question of why one does wrong. And it's important to understand why one does wrong. Because let us say that we have something that we want to clean. We want to make it bright and clean and pure. The first thing we have to do is we have to remove the gross dirt that is sticking all over the place before we can do detailed cleaning. So the preparation of the mind is also like that. Preparation for the mind, chitta shuddhi, it requires a pure mind. But then if there are gross elements of dirt, etc., then one has to focus on getting rid of it first. And that's why the question of why one does wrong becomes important. First, the things that we are doing wrong in our lives, we have to try to eliminate that before we can start to do detailed purification of the mind. So we said this question is somewhat akin to why one falls sick. And there are two factors involved there. One is the enemy, the germs that cause the disease, but the other thing is my own immunity. And the stronger the immunity is, the less affected one is by the germs, the enemies that may enter the system. So Arjuna asked this question to Krishna about what is it that one makes, or that makes one do wrong. And for that, Krishna answered, Kama esha krodha esha rajoguna samudbhavaha mahashano mahapapma vidyenamiha vairinam. So Krishna said, what makes one do wrong are these two things, kamaha and krodha, desire and anger. But like we said, Krishna was using a singular throughout, even though he mentioned two things. And the reason is that anger is just a modified form of desire. When the desire is obstructed, it leads to anger. We said Krishna used this term mahashanaha, means desire has got this very big diet. So no matter how much you feed it, there is still more desire. And fundamentally, we said it is because of apurnatvam, because I feel apurnaha and I want purnatvam, that seeking shows up in the form of desire, and therefore I'm desiring one thing or the other, thinking that that will lead me to fulfillment. And this, if this seeking or the desire is not channelized properly, then it can make one do adharma. So is every kind of desire a problem? We say no, there are many dharmika desires like desire for doing service, desire for doing one's duty, desire for satsanga, desire for Vedanta, desire for moksha, desire for doing various dharma karyas, etc. So those do not constitute as the desires that are being discussed by Krishna here. Because Krishna says elsewhere, Dharma viruddho bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshana. That I am in the form of those dharmic desires. So they are the ones that make one grow. So those desires are not being discussed here. What is being discussed are the desires that arise in the mind that lead one on the path of a dharma. Or any desire that becomes an obsession is also a problem. So if desire, these kinds of desires are the enemy that make one do wrong, then what is the immunity? We said the immunity is karya vivekaha. The ability to distinguish what is right, what is wrong. That is the immunity. And this lack of immunity, if it is there, we said is caused by these half assimilated values, like we saw in one of the earlier classes. Why a half assimilated value is a problem? And therefore, one needs vichara, contemplation on the values, to see that the value is not following the value is causing harm to me. And when I see all these consequences, like we said, what are the consequences of lying? Conflict, guilt, worry, etc. A split person, split between the knower and the doer. When I see all those consequences, then I will stay away from this. So this is the vivekaha, the karya vivekaha, that is the immunity. And what happens, Krishna describes this like we saw, dhume navriyate vannihi yatha darsho malena cha yathol benavritah garbhaha tatha tenedam avritam. What Krishna said is like this kamaha arises and covers one's viveka like cloud covers smoke. That's the first example. And in that case, the smoke is easily removed. If the vichara, if the viveka is strong enough, then a little bit of vichara will just remove the smoke. So many of these kinds of desires that may just enter the mind temporarily and create a cloud, they are dismissed. The second type is when a mirror, darpena, yatha malena, darpanaha, yatha malena. Here Krishna uses the word adarshaha. Adarshaha effectively means a mirror, darpanaha. So when dirt covers a mirror, it requires a little bit of wiping. Just blowing it away doesn't get rid of it. So there are some desires that may enter the mind that require a little bit more vichara, some more vichara. And if the vivekaha is there, then that gets rid of that potentially harmful desire. And the third kind is where the covering is even greater. And in that case, some growing up, some time is required. And the Krishna gives the example of a fetus that is covered by the womb. So in such cases, the desire can potentially be around for some time and make the person do wrong. The next thing we were discussing towards the end of the last class is what is this? Is there any equivalent of a hygiene? For disease prevention, there is hygiene. And there's a lot of stress on hygiene. So what is the hygiene here? And we said, Krishna says elsewhere that thought hygiene is required. And this is where we were looking at shlokas 2.62, chapter 2, verse 62 and verse 63. So if you have your copy of the Gita, you can follow along as I discuss those. So verse 2, chapter 2, verse 62 says, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsaha Sangasteshu Pajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha Kamat Krodho Bhijayate Krodhat Bhavati Sammohaha Sammohat Smriti Vibhramaha Smriti Bhramshat Buddhinashaha Buddhinashat Pranashyati. So upajayate, Krishna says it is born. What is born? Sangaha upajayate. Sangas teshu upajayate. Split as sangaha teshu upajayate. So sangaha upajayate. What is born? A certain fondness is born. Now, for whom is this fondness born, or basically, in what kind of a person is this fondness born? It says dhyayataha pumsaha, in a person who is brooding. Dhyayataha pumsaha sangaha upajayate. In what is this fondness born? It says teshu, in those. In what? Vishayan, the person is thinking about something. So in the objects, a fondness is born. And then Krishna goes on to say, Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha. Here Krishna is describing how Kamaha is born. So initially, see, there are a lot of things that enter the mind. Like we said, if we look at a pot, then invariably a pot thought arises in the mind. So it is not possible for me to see objects in the world without their corresponding thoughts arising in the mind. So thoughts arise in the mind, but there are so many things that I see that the thoughts arise in the mind and then leave the mind. But then there are certain objects or certain people. For some reason, they enter the mind and then they don't leave the mind just like that. Swamiji gives the example that suppose I have put glue all over my body and I'm walking around. After some time, I'll find there are various objects that just stick to the body. So similarly, the mind has a bit of this gluing tendency. With certain objects, they just stick to the mind. And when that happens, the object doesn't leave the mind, it keeps coming back, and the person thinks about it again and again. And there are many wonderful objects in the world. And therefore, even if they come back to the mind, one may recall how wonderful they are, etc. That is still not a problem. But when it becomes a problem is when the person starts to associate one's apurnatvam with this object and then starts to project that if this object becomes mine, then my apurnatvam, I'll be relieved of this apurnatvam. So then one starts to establish a connection with this object, saying that I want to possess this object. And that is what Krishna is saying here. Sangat sanjayate kamaha. And then what happens? That we know the resources in the world are limited and the people chasing it are many. So I may want to possess an object, but there may be others also who want to possess that object. And then somebody may obstruct my pursuit of this object. I may be pursuing this object, planning doing this, doing that, but I may see somebody else foiling that plan, somebody else coming in the way. Therefore, then kamat krodho bhijayate. Kamat krodha abhijayate. So then this desire transforms into anger. And then what happens? Kama krodhat. Next, we go to the next verse, 63rd verse. Krodhat bhavati sammohaha. And this anger leads to delusion. Sammohaha. So this verse is interesting from a Sanskrit grammar perspective. We see all these At coming everywhere. Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsaha Sangasteshu Pajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha Kamat Krodho Bhijayate Krodhat Bhavati Sammohaha Sammohat Smriti Vibhramaha Smriti Bhramshat Buddhinashaha Buddhinashat Pranashyati. So what this At indicates is this Panchami Vibhakti. It's called Panchami in Sanskritam. And what the Panchami indicates is a source of something, the source of the action or the cause of the action. So what Krishna is indicating here is a sequence of things. One thing leads to another, and the next thing leads to a next thing, and the next thing leads to a next thing, and so on. So it's a clean sequence that is indicated here. And that is what we are discussing. The brooding person develops this fondness, and the fondness leads to kamaha, and the kamaha leads to krodha. The next step is this krodha leads to sammoha. So we want to look into what this sammoha is, and that is where I thought we will take a look at the Shankara Bhashyam as to what Shankara's commentary says here. And there are a few reasons why I thought this portion will be interesting, because number one, it gives us a familiarity with what the structure of the Shankara Bhashyam is like. How does Shankara comment on a particular verse of the Gita? And this verse is actually not that difficult. It is a simpler verse, and therefore the commentary is also quite simple and easy to follow, and it will give a taste for what a study of the Bhashyam looks like. So if we were to look at this, and I had sent us a picture of this on the WhatsApp group also, so you can pull that up, or if you have a copy of the Bhashyam, you can also follow it as I am talking about this. So let us look at the Bhashyam for verse 63. And what Shankara does is that Shankaracharya takes each word from the main shloka or a phrase from the main shloka and then writes a small commentary on that particular phrase extracted from the shloka. So in this, whatever is in bold letters, that is Shankara's commentary, and whatever is in the light letter, those are words that are extracted from the moolam, the shloka of the Bhagavad Gītā. So let us look at this. Starts with Krodhat bhavati sammoha. So this is extracted from the verse as it is. And Shankaracharya says, what is sammoha? So Krodhat bhavati sammoha avivekaha karya vishayah. So Shankaracharya says the sammoha is avivekaha karya vishayah. This is what we have been talking about. That a certain vivekaha is required about what is right, what is wrong. And this sammoha, due to anger, it results in this krodhat bhavati sammoha. The anger results in this sammoha, and the sammoha is basically avivekaha. Avivekaha means one is then not able to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. And then Shankara goes on to comment, Kruddho hi sammudhas san gurumapi akroshati. Says that when one is angered, one is deluded. Kruddha means angered, sammudha means deluded. The angered, deluded person, gurumapi akroshati. Such a person loses the viveka to such an extent that he may even abuse the guru. And then the commentary goes on up to the next phrase, sammohat smriti vibhramaha. So sammohat, From this delusion, what arises? Smriti vibhramaha. So in general, if you look at a loose translation of the English translation, etc., they'll say there's a smriti vibhramaha, meaning there is a loss of memory or forgetfulness. That kind of a meaning is given. But Shankara gives a very fine meaning here for smriti vibhramaha. And this is one of the beauties of Shankara's bhashyam, that Shankaracharya extracts these very fine meanings from the shlokas that are generally missed in various translations, etc. So let us read what the meaning of Smriti Vibhramaha given by Shankara is. So Shankara says, शास्त्राचार्योपदेशाहित संस्कार जनितायाः स्मृतेः स्याद् विभ्रमः विभ्रमो भ्रंशः स्मृत्युत्पत्ति निमित्त प्राप्तौ अनुत्पत्तिः. So Shankara breaks it up. Smriti Vibhramaha is broken up into two words, Smriti and Vibhramaha. And Shankara first explains what Smriti is. Shankara says Smriti is Janita. Janita means the Smriti is born. So Smriti is a certain recollection. Recollection is born. Janita. Janitayaha is basically derived from Janita. So born from what? If you look at the previous word, samskara janitayaha. So smriti is born out of samskaraha. So this recollection is born out of samskaraha, is what the Bhashyam says here. So what is samskaraha? We need to understand this a bit, that as we go about in the world, every experience, Vedanta says that every experience generates an impression in the mind. Maybe it may be any experience, it generates an impression in the mind that is stored in the mind. And that impression is called samskaraha. So as we go about, we are gathering a lot of samskaras that keep getting stored in the mind, but then they just stay latent. And we are carrying samskaras not just from this birth, but from innumerable previous births. We are carrying all the samskaras. So generally the samskaras stay latent in the mind. But how are these samskaras generated? From experiences. That is why it said anubhava janya samskaraha. Experience leads to samskaraha. So samskaraha is born from anubhavaha. That is what it says. Anubhava janya samskaraha. Then how is the recollection born? Smriti. How is the smriti born? We say samskara janya smritihi. So the smriti is born from samskaraha. The stored impressions give rise to the recollection. For example, let us say that I have visited Tirupati. And so there is the Tirupati samskara stored in my mind. And then every day that samskara doesn't give rise to memory in my mind. But suddenly someday somebody goes to Tirupati and brings me the prasada. And then somebody gives me the prasada. Suddenly that prasada that I see leads to a recollection of my own Tirupati experience. So this is a stimulus. Some stimulus, external stimulus is required that causes the samskara to produce the smriti. And that is known as udbodhakaha. Udbodhakaha means a stimulus. So the stimulus gives rise to the smriti from samskaraha. Now what we say is that when a person attends satsanga, for example, or even Vedanta classes and Shastra classes and all that, then those experiences also produce samskaras. The experience of that learning produces samskara that is stored in the mind. So that is what the Bhashya says here. We saw it is janita. Samskara, smriti is janita, means it's born. Born from what? Samskara janita. And what kind of samskara it is? Ahita samskara. Ahita samskara. The ahita word is there in the Shastra Charyopadesha Ahita samskara janitayaha smritehe. So this ahita word is there. What it means is etched or deposited. Deposited. So this smriti is born from samskara. What kind of samskara? Samskara that has been deposited. So we are going right to left in that compound word. So deposited samskara. Deposited by whom? Upadesha hita samskara. Deposited by the upadesha. Deposited by the teaching. Who's teaching? Shastra Charyopadesha. So Shankara is saying this smriti is born from the samskara deposited in the mind by the teaching of the Shastra and Acharya. So that is what that whole thing means. Shastra Charyopadesha hita samskara janitaya smritehe syat vibhramaha. He says such a smriti is lost or destroyed. Vibhramaha. But as we say, this smriti itself is something that is supposed to be produced from the samskara. So when this something that is produced is vibhramaha, destroyed, then is it produced and then destroyed? Shankara says no. This vibhramaha is bhramshaha. It means smrityutpatti nimitta praptau anutpattihi. So there's anutpattihi, smritehe, anutpattihi. The smriti doesn't arise at all, Shankara says. So this smriti that is supposed to arise from the samskaras deposited by the teaching of the Acharya and the Shastra, the samskara that is supposed to arise when the stimulus is there, nimitta praptau, when the stimulus is there, when I am in this condition where I may be about to contemplate doing something wrong. And when there is krodha, and in that krodha environment, when somebody is contemplating something wrong, then this smriti that is supposed to arise from the teaching of the Acharya and the Shastra, it doesn't arise. So that is the fine meaning that Shankara gives here. And then let us see what happens after that. Tataha smriti bhramshat buddhehe nashaha. So in the Moolam that it says smriti bhramshat buddhi nashaha. When this smriti doesn't arise, it is then buddhi nashaha happens from it. Because of that, buddhi nashaha happens. So what is this buddhehe nashaha? Shankaracharya says karya vishaya viveka yogyata antakaranasya buddhehe nasha uchyate. So this karya vishaya viveka that is supposed to be there. Ayogyata happens. One becomes ayogya of doing that vichara. One becomes incapable of doing that vichara because of the loss of the smriti. The smriti arises, then that is like the immunity fighting the disease. If that smriti arises, then the next vichara can happen. But if the smriti itself doesn't arise because one is so angered, then one becomes ayogya to do this karya viveka. And that is what is called antakaranasya buddhehe nashaha. That is buddhi nashaha. Then what happens? Bhagavad Gītā says, buddhi nashat pranashyati. Because of buddhi nashaha, one is destroyed. Tavadeva, Shankara comments, Tavadeva hi purushaha yavad antakaranam tadiyam karya vishaya viveka yogyam tadayogyatve nashta eva purusho bhavati. So Shankara says the purushaha that we say, like we saw in this other place, we saw this buddhya vihinaha pashubhis samanaha. One becomes like an animal. This buddhirhitesham adhiko visheshaha buddhya vihinaha pashubhis samanaha. So here Shankara is saying something similar. Tavadeva hi purushaha yavad antakaranam tadiyam. As long as the antakaranam, the buddhi is there, only then this purusha is there. Karya vishaya viveka yogyam. Then the person is karya vishaya viveka yogyam. He is capable of doing the karya vishaya viveka. Tadayogyatve nashta eva purusho bhavati. When that one becomes incapable of that, then the purusha itself is not there. Instead of that, you can say a pashu is there. Therefore, Shankara continues, Ataha tasya antakaranasya buddhehe nashat pranashyati purushartha yogyo bhavati ityarthaha. So because of this buddhi nashaha, antakaranasya buddhehe nashat pranashyati, the person is destroyed, and then the purusha itself is not there. Where is the question of purushartha? And therefore Shankara says purushartha ayogya bhavati. Purushartha yogyo bhavati is purushartha ayogya. That's how it's played. Therefore, this person becomes incapable of the purusharthas, incapable of pursuing these artha, kama, dharma. What about moksha? Forget moksha, he says. So basically, this hygiene is very important. This thought hygiene is very important. And so there is this 8-runged ladder of fall that is described here. The brooding leads to sangaha, sangaha leads to kamaha, kamaha leads to krodha, krodha leads to sammoha, sammoha leads to smriti vibhrama, smriti vibhrama to buddhinashaha, buddhinashat pranashyati. These are the steps. This leads us. What is it that we have to learn from this? Basically, that when these thoughts arise, it is important to be alert. Some alertness is required to nip these kinds of thoughts in the bud, to trim them when I recognize that this is something that may be leading me down a wrong direction. So, what are these? If we try to classify the thoughts like we were discussing the last time, there are basically three types of thoughts that can arise in the mind. One is thoughts that are a result of objects around me. And the second is thoughts that are produced from within my mind itself due to certain vasanas, due to certain impressions or samskaras that I'm carrying. Those thoughts arise from within the mind. And the third is will-based thoughts, where I use my will in order to dwell upon a particular topic. I say I'm working on a project and therefore I want to focus on these things. I want to deliberate on this topic, and I apply my mind as an instrument to dwell upon certain thoughts. So broadly, there are these three kinds of thoughts that can arise in the mind. Now, if we look at random object-based thoughts, those are not in my control largely. Of course, at home, I can create an environment around me where I put, for example, pictures of Ishvara, pictures of Guru, etc. And though when I see that, then it leads to certain thoughts that are pure and certain thoughts that are good, dharmika vrittis. And so those are not a problem, and within one's home one can create such an environment. But when one goes out, then there is all kinds of things that enter the mind. So if I start to pursue those thoughts, then that can be a problem. And similarly, there are thoughts that arise from within the mind due to numerous vasanas that one may carry in the mind. And the third is will-based thoughts, like we discussed. So if my life is largely comprised of object-based thoughts and vasana-based thoughts, then what happens is that these thoughts enter the mind and then they start to dictate a certain agenda or immediate agenda, and that may develop into one's life's agenda also. So these may, unless I practice a certain hygiene, these may lead me down the wrong tracks. So what we say is, instead of being enslaved by object-based thoughts or vasana-based thoughts, even the vasana-based thought, there are shubha vasana-based thoughts and ashubha vasana-based thoughts. So those that are shubha vasanas, I should be encouraging. But if there are ashubha vasana-based thoughts, a certain alertness of the mind is required. So what we say is that when such thoughts arise, then one needs a certain skill to substitute these thoughts with will-based thoughts. And those will-based thoughts should be those that are aligned with my higher goals in life. So that way, I am guiding my life on a track which is aligned with my higher goals. See, this is where satsanga and things like that help. Swadhyaya, satsanga, etc. They are meant to generate these will-based thoughts in the mind. In a satsanga environment also, in fact, you can say those are object-based thoughts. In the satsanga, the thoughts that I hear here, those are objects. But they lead to the cultivation of, at the same time, I am deliberating on it also. So there are will-based thoughts that arise in my mind. So essentially, the idea is that I try to use my will to create these thoughts in my mind that lead me in the right direction. Because these thoughts are what becomes my words, they become my deeds, and then the deeds determine my character, and the character is what determines my destiny. So the source of my destiny, what I call my destiny today, was its seeds. If you look at where my destiny originated from, it originated from my own thoughts in the past. So the destiny of my today is a result of my thoughts in the past. And if I want to have a good destiny in the future, then I need to make sure that my thoughts today are ones that lead me in the right direction. So this is where the thought-based hygiene becomes very important. So now we come back to the topic of the individual harmony. So we were discussing how dharma, how following a life of duties and values promotes individual harmony. And if one were to neglect that, then it results in individual disharmony. So we saw the example of disharmony like the conflict, guilt, hurt, and the split within the individual, etc. And then we also saw this chain of things from thoughts to fondness to kama to krodha that can lead me to adharma, and that also leads me to this disharmony within the individual. Now, in the example of lying, we took the example of how the pursuit of money, for example, leads me to commit the wrong act of speaking the untruth. So that was a pursuit of artha that led to adharma. Similarly, the pursuit of kama can also lead to adharma. And what are the examples of that? So the slavery to one's sense organs and the desire to to have this association of the sense organs with the sense objects can lead to adharma. And we see examples of this, we read about it every day. This is especially true when one is younger, and there are lots of directions in which the mind can go that is not in keeping with dharma. And one of the examples of this is drugs. So if you look at drugs, then these are now penetrating the schools and colleges, etc. And what is that? That is basically a contact of the sense organ with some sense object that leads to some kind of a pleasurable sensation in the mind. But that's an example of a pursuit of kamaha that is not in keeping with dharma. Another example is that this device itself has become like a modern day drug. This device and all the things that the device contains, like games, etc. So those things are very addictive. And once one gets addicted to it, it's very hard to keep it away. So the device becomes a master and the person becomes a slave. So that is another example of kamaha that leads to adharma, and it is clearly there is adharma involved because it results in a disharmony in the individual. The individual abandons a lot of other things that are important pursuits in life and then becomes addicted to this, becomes a slave of this. And a more concrete example of this is, if you take, I was reading an interview given by Pragyananda's coach. And as many of you will know, Pragyananda is this prodigy chess player. He says that there are many kids who have the same potential like Pragyananda does. But basically, he says that many of them fall to this device addiction. And because of the device addiction, their attention span has reduced considerably. He says that for this generation, the attention span now is only 20% of what it was about 15 years ago. That is the extent to which he sees the degeneration of the attention span amongst the chess players he is training. So this is the kind of effect that it has on the individual. And then I was reading another study a few months ago about 1/3 of the teen girls in US having mental health issues because of social media addiction. They spend so much time on social media that if somebody says that I like this or like that, then the person's mind goes on a high. But at the same time, if a few people criticize whatever they have done or written, then the person goes into a depression. So all of these are examples where the person becomes a slave to some object. And this is clearly against dharma, because kamaha, arthaha should be in moderation. If the arthaha or kamaha pursuit becomes such a high priority that it begins to affect the individual, then clearly there has been adharma. And that is where austerity and discipline, this tapaha, become important, because I should evaluate at every point, every day, I should have some sensitivity to evaluate. Am I getting addicted to something? Am I getting too dependent on something? One has to, like this medical checkup that one does annually, periodically, there's a need for this. Am I too dependent on something? Kind of a checkup that needs to be done. And that is where tapaha, austerity, moderation comes in. If I sense that I'm getting addicted to something, then I deliberately try to create a separations to see if I can live without it. And whether I'm okay without it. And in fact, that kind of a fasting, a kind of a diet that if one goes on once in a while, then that is a very healthy thing. So the overall point that we are trying to get to is that the pursuit of artha and kamaha need to be in keeping with dharma. That is what the Shastras and the Acharya are repeatedly trying to emphasize this point. And if we come to the family, then even for the family harmony, the samanya dharma is very important. That if a person is, for example, cheating or lying to other family members, then that creates disharmony in the family. So the that's why it's called samanya dharma, means the dharma that everybody is expected to follow, no matter what the domain is, whether it is the domain of the individual, whether it is a family domain, whether it is a society, whether it is in relation to the environment. I cannot be violating samanya dharma. So in the family also, for the harmony of the family, it's very important, this samanya dharma. And the lady of the house is called Saha Dharmacharini. That means that the lady and the man, they come together, and the vision of the Shastra is that this is for the pursuit of dharma. It is for the pursuit of artha and kama, definitely. Artha in grihastha ashrama, there is pursuit of artha and kama, but that artha and kama pursuit need to be in keeping with dharma. That is why saha dharmacharini. And if we look at it, then this dharma, pursuit of dharma, becomes a common unifying factor for everybody in the family. Otherwise, what can happen is if artha and kamaha are alone there without dharma, then each person may end up pursuing their own individual artha and kamaha agenda. Now, what is there to keep the family together? In the vision of the Shastra, this dharma becomes a unifying element where everybody comes together for some dharma karyam or something. So, this creates a bond between the family members. And that is why emphasis on dharma in the family. And then, if you look at the modern day, there's a lot of emphasis on rights. So everywhere we see clamoring of rights, basically in terms of women's rights, children's rights, this right, that right, etc. So there is an emphasis on rights all over the world. But if we look at how our Shastras present dharma, they don't talk about rights at all. They just talk about duties. And the interesting thing is that when one person does the duty expected of the person, then somebody's rights are met in the process. So Pujya Swamiji says, then when the husband does the husband's duty, then the wife's rights are met. Similarly, when the wife does her duties, the husband's rights are met. And when the children do their duties, the parents' rights are met. And the parents do their duties, the children's rights are met. So Veda doesn't get into this, the Shastras don't get into this kind of enumeration of 101 rights that every individual has. It says just to do your duty. And in doing that duty, when somebody else's rights are met, then there is harmony. So, in fact, Puja Swamiji says here that even it is not necessary to spell out so many duties also. It is enough to say, make the other person happy. And in making the other person in the family happy, then what are the things that one needs to do to make the other person happy? Automatically, one knows what the rights are. In fact, Puja Swamiji says it is not really possible to make another person happy. But when one tries to take the effort to make the other person happy, and the other person sees that one is taking the effort to make me happy, that itself makes the other person happy. So this dharma, this idea of dharma within the family actually helps keeps families together. What we see these days is that in a lot of families, for example, when the dharma component is not there, then it becomes like a hostel or a hotel or something, where each family member is there, they're pursuing their own thing, and they come in once in a while and take something out of the fridge and eat it and go away. So that is not the kind of family that Veda has in mind. It's a family where there is an idea about what dharma is, what duties are, and that do performance of the duties in such an environment that leads to one's growth. Now, the next topic here is the social harmony and the environmental harmony. And I thought that I wanted to finish these two topics also. So I'll take 5 more minutes and try to cover this also, so that at least the topic will be complete. So in terms of the social harmony, we say again samanya dharma, the idea of the satyam vada and ahimsa, asteya, etc. are very important in the social environment also. And in the society, there is emphasis on the leaders being people who emphasize on dharma, not just artha and kamaha. Because if the leaders are seen as being rampant followers of only artha and kamaha, then the whole society follows them. Like we saw in the Bhagavad Gītā, it says, yad yad achariti shresthaha tattadeve taro janaha. So everybody follows the leaders. And therefore, the leaders set an example by being sensitive to dharma, then the society also becomes dharmic. In the Vedic view of society, even the king or the ruler is somebody who has a guru and who consults with the guru on important matters related to dharma. And the job of the guru is to make sure that there is no gross violation of the adharma, gross violation of dharma in the entire agenda of the kingdom, in the important things or initiatives that are being taken up. And if the citizen, for example, fulfills the duties, then the rights of the state are met. And similarly, the state is also bound by dharma to perform the duties of the state so that the citizens' rights are met. So as you see that the dharma is something that is all encompassing. There is no division that, dharma should be followed only in this sphere of existence, and somewhere else there is no dharma, it can be adharma. That is not the case, because everybody's actions, no matter what the sphere is, they have the potential to produce harmony or potential to produce disharmony. And therefore, if the overall well-being is important, then it becomes important that dharma be followed at all levels of existence, whether it be the individual level, family level, society level, state, corporate, whatever it be. And so this brings us to even the corporations, for example. Even the corporations, there was, in fact, in those times, there was no idea of such corporations, because all the goods and services were produced by communities. But now everything has been outsourced to corporations. So even the corporate actions, they can be categorized as being right or wrong, whether they lead to harmony or disharmony. So the leaders of the corporations also need to be sensitive to what dharma is. We can see these things like certain corporations. If you take examples of pharmaceutical companies, they may produce certain medicines. Even if they know that a particular cure exists, they may not promote that particular cure, but may produce medicines that don't really cure something, but essentially make the customer keep coming back to them. So From a purely artha perspective, that may be a good strategy. But the moment you evaluate it in the light of dharma, then it becomes something that one has to think about. This is not in line with dharma. And similarly, there may be many corporations that know the addictive potential of the products they are producing, like all these games and social media. There are various things that are added there to capture eyeballs so that they can show them more advertisements or things. So all of those decisions are generally made from a purely arthas perspective. But what the Shastras urge people to think about dharma also when making such decisions. And then there is this social inequality, social imbalance, the bridge between the rich and the poor. And that is why there is insistence on dhanam, so that this inequality can be bridged. Because in a society where there is a huge divide between the rich and the poor, then there will be a lot of conflict and strife. There will be disharmony. So dhanam is an act that is in keeping with the promotion of harmony. That is why it becomes dharma. And now, if we come to the environmental level, then what the Shastras present is that we need to be in a kind of a reverential coexistence with nature. So nature is not a resource that is to be blatantly exploited. In fact, that has been the vision of the largely the Western world and the colonizers, and they have always viewed the world around them as something which has to be uh, exploited, and where one has to try to extract the maximum out of something, and even by conquering lands and enslaving the people, try to extract the maximum out of it. That is not how we view it. So as we have said, there are all these creatures that are working round the clock, and when they do their thing, the harmony is maintained in the universe. The creatures, if they were left to themselves, they would do no harm. They will, those creatures would only promote harmony. They cannot by themselves. If the human beings are not there in this picture, the creatures would not have caused this global warming kind of a thing. So we say, somebody who pointed out that if all the insects were to disappear from the environment, then the whole planet would collapse, because the insects are food for something else. And if insects are not there, then that species collapses, and that is food for something else, and that thing collapses. The entire food chain collapses. If that happens, the whole planet collapses. A human being cannot survive. But if all the humans were to disappear from this planet, then this entire planet would thrive. All this imbalance, etc., largely, clearly, there has been a big hand of the humans in this. So we have been saying that we were very scared of corona and all that. And corona is the biggest virus to have come around because it is devastating humans. But from another perspective, if we look at the biggest virus that has been around on the planet, and perhaps the human beings themselves would qualify as the biggest virus, because the human beings have been responsible for destroying the maximum number of species on this with all their actions. Human being is ironically the most intelligent of the creatures on this planet, but at the same time the most stupidest of the creatures also, because the human being can use the intelligence to destroy the very environment in which the human being survives. And this was an interesting statement made by Martin Luther King, and I'm just paraphrasing it, not quoting him exactly. But he says that our technological or scientific prowess has far exceeded our spiritual prowess. And he says now we have guided missiles in the hands of misguided men. So on one hand, we are making technological progress like anything. and we are developing new things which are capable of more and more devastation. But in the other hand, if we lose sight of what dharma is, then such things in the hands of dharmic people can be very dangerous. With artificial intelligence, now we might have guided hands, guided missiles in the hands of guided machines, in the hands of misguided men. So this requires, as you can see, basically there is a balance that is required between one's artha kama progress, or whatever you call material progress, and dharma. And if one overtakes the other, then that creates a lot of problems. So there is all this climate change and extreme climate events that we are seeing, and there is a very worrisome thing that we see now, that there are microplastics in the embryo of human beings. They have detected microplastics, and microplastics are there now in the clouds also. If you take a sample from the cloud, then the water in the clouds, that is carrying microplastics. So all of these are signs that the artha kama pursuits, the pendulum seems to have swung too far in the other direction, and there has to be some need for a balance. Because as they say, you may have a plan B, but there's no planet B. So this kind of a development is somewhat akin to a tumor that grows in the body. The tumor grows in the body at the expense of taking the nutrition from everywhere else. And when the tumor goes beyond a certain point, then it kills the very host in which it is there. So development, there is certainly development for the sustenance of the individual and all of that. But if that development takes a turn where it starts to affect the very host, then that becomes like a cancerous development. That kind of a development is not sustainable. And that is why there is a need for some kind of a dharmic awakening, especially amongst the thought leaders and leaders who are setting the agenda for the direction in which the world has to move. And there's a need for a lot of introspection here. And the solution starts with understanding of dharma. One has to have this understanding of dharma, because there is no dimension of human activity that can be outside of dharma. And dharma awareness in education is very important to produce individuals who can then take the world in the right direction. So I'll conclude here and we'll continue in the next class. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. So I took about 10 minutes overtime, but at least that way we got a closure to this topic. So we may have another 5 minutes perhaps for some comments. So if you have any ideas or comments, questions, you're welcome to talk about it.
Vishwanathan here again. Can I ask? Hello? Hello? Am I audible? Hello?
Yes.
Vishwanathan here.
Yes. Yeah. Vishwanathan ji. Yeah.
Two things I just thought of asking. First one is Vedas, Smritis, and Srutis, everything was existing will exist in the future also. But only thing is, these kind of a teaching we should have built in our curriculum and school itself, so that the individual level we can learn and then make the children who's going to become the senior citizens, and then they can bring the individual harmony, family harmony, social harmony, and environmental harmony. What we are discussing, I don't know why we lost this kind of education in our in our pursuit of maybe making money, or I do not know. So we lost that first. This is the first question. You can just give me the clarity on that. Why not?
Yes.
Even though we lost it, why not we introduce this into the school itself? That's the first question. Second, in the past, well, I will not comment about in general, but I'm talking about myself. I also made a lot of mistakes by doer and knower split. Many occasions, working in a corporations, lot of lies, lot of things to make the customer to bring into the fold. So now this guilt is with me. Now, whatever past mistakes I've done, by learning this in these classes and then practicing, trying to be, do the Dharma. So the past guilt will remain with me, or how does it go? I do not know. These are the two questions, conflicting questions I'm asking you. If you can answer, that will be great.
Yes. Actually, we'll take that first question, and your point is what you said is spot on. Basically, this entire education that we are talking about here, right? It was a part of the Gurukula system.
Correct.
The Gurukulas had all this content and this entire idea of the Purusharthas and what the goal of life is. All of this was presented in the Gurukulas. But basically what happened is that the Gurukula system was systematically demolished during the colonization.
Oh.
And basically, the British also realized that this Gurukula system is the strength of these individuals, right, who are bringing a certain resistance to the colonial system and all that.
Yeah.
And so there was a systematic effort to demolish this by cutting the funding to it. In fact, this survived on a lot of donations made by the villages and all of that, right? So by imposing taxation and all this, they cut the funding source. There's basically a lot of details you can read about it, about how this Gurukula system was affected. But the point is that these beautiful ideas, right, which should form the core of a person, right? All of that was systematically removed. And then there was also this idea that of this so-called better system of colonial education that was brought in. And naturally, what they did is that people who graduated from that system, they got better salaries and better job opportunities and all that. So that led to the society also getting basically tempted to abandon their traditional educational system and go for this. So there was all of this involved. And then this idea of secularism came in, and that further created a rift that, we should completely separate religion from this and all of that. And the secular education system doesn't touch many of these ideas because it comes from our scriptures, and they are, considered to be basically adhering to a certain religion. Even though many of these ideas, basically, they are ideas that are for the good of the world, right? They still cannot be taught because of this secular box that we have put ourselves in. So that is, in brief, the answer to the first question. And basically, if we have to try to somehow bring this back into our education system, and people are trying to do that through extracurricular activities, or parents who know about this, they try to expose their children to these kinds of ideas outside of school, because they know that they're not getting it in the school. But the ideal situation, like you say, is that it should be integrated into the curriculum. And in fact, Mahaperiyava has said regarding this that secular doesn't mean that there should be no religion. What he says is, let each child learn about their particular religion, right?
As part of the subject. As a part of
As a
subject.
part of the curriculum itself, and that
Right.
is another possibility. But and our governments are probably making some efforts in this regard also with the new education policy and all that. But I don't know if they have considered these things, and to what extent it is incorporated, I'm not sure. And regarding your second question about past guilt, etc., right? Basically, the many times we knowingly or unknowingly commit mistakes.
Yeah.
And if we have unknowingly committed a mistake, then that is due to ignorance, right? And if one knew, then one would perhaps have done something different. And in some cases, one knowingly does something because there are various other pressures that one has to. One may be in a certain system, but then there are pressures of having to feed the family and all of that, due to which one may not be able to immediately resign from the job. There are many situations like that. So ideally, if one has the flexibility, then one should make the change, move over to an environment that is not violating dharma, right? One has the flexibility, one should try to do that. And there are many of these things. For example, if you take speaking the truth itself, right? Then what Swamiji says in this regard is that if one has been, saying has been habituated to saying lies, etc., it may be very difficult to transition to saying the truth on all matters. It may be difficult to make that transition. What he says is start with the avoidable lies, right? There are certain lies called avoidable lies that one can avoid first. And then one starts with the avoidable lies. And then as one tries to follow this discipline, then slowly the unavoidable lies will also start to become avoidable. So that way one can gradually make a transition. So I think that is a brief answer. Yeah.
Now, even though our Shastra says Satyam Vada Dharmam Chara, we are easily falling prey to Asatyam and then Adharmam. I do not know. This is easy to capture. I don't know why.
Yes, and some of the contemplation that we discussed about assimilating the value and seeing the the hurt that it causes to me, those are important things to try to make progress in that area.
Thank you.
We will conclude then, because it's already much over time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hari Om. Hari.
Hari. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hari Om. Thank you.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Hari Om. Thank you.
Hari Om. Thank you.
Hari Om.